we are awakening to the reality that what worked previously in the industrial age no longer works for us in the idea age. We're in the connection economy and the idea economy right now. And everything that got us here is not going to continue to help us evolve.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. So many of us are questioning what's true in the media, especially now. It can be difficult to know which sources can be trusted, and there are endless challenges to having access to so much information and stimulation. However, at the same time, we can learn some incredible things because of this access to all that stimulation and information. So media has always been a tool that's only as good as the integrity of the forces behind it, as well as the integrity of the individual consuming it. I'm not really here to tackle making media better, perhaps, except for my own contributions in that realm. But I think it's incredibly important for all of us who experience the world to understand our relationship with media. Who do we believe and why? Who do we not believe and why? What are our media consumption behaviors? Like, are you on your laptop till midnight? The weekend before recording the interview with today's guest, I did a 48-hour digital detox at home in my regular life. I didn't even listen to the radio when I drove my car. I was so surprised to observe how different I felt without access to media. Not only did I have a deeper sense of dropping in with my 3.5-year-old son, getting into his world, playing, being, and watching how he sees things, I was able to observe the many things my mind grasped for in the little pockets of idle time I had throughout the day, like wanting to go Google whenever I had a question I didn't know the answer to, or scan my messages, or look at my to-do list. Want to know what happened? Well, I survived, and I actually had a really wonderful time. So what's the media's impact on humanity? Listen and find out where this all could be going. You're listening to the Wisdom of the Body.
Today I'm here with Jessica Ann, who is the CEO and creative director of Jam, a marketing agency that develops compelling content for top-tier brands. With a master's degree in communications from Johns Hopkins University, Jessica inspires advocates for Fortune 500 companies through shared emotions and experiences, driving hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue in a way that's authentic and fun. In Jessica's former life on the East Coast, she was a news producer for national media outlets such as NBC News Channel and XM Radio in Washington, D.C. She's the author of the book Humanize Your Brand, How to Create Content That Connects with Your Customers. And she's the podcast host of The Art of Humanity, where she explores creativity and consciousness with artists, leaders, authors, and entrepreneurs. She's interviewed best-selling authors like Seth Godin and James Altucher, world-famous neurosurgeon Dr. Jack Kruse, and the creator of the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd. Jessica's writing and podcast have been featured in the Huffington Post, Elephant Journal, The Good Men Project, Thought Catalog, and Apple's New and Notable and What's Hot list. She's also been a keynote speaker at Google. Jessica wants to put an end to feeding the fast media approach to news and polarity. She feels called to help birth a new frequency on Earth that guides conscious leaders on how to use their voices to transition the globe into higher consciousness. One of the ways she does this is by working with leaders who want to start and scale their podcasts into globally recognized brands. In fact, she helped me start this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica.
So my pleasure, Heather. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So my podcast teacher here today, she happens to be a really interesting person.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jessica's got such great experience in media, and because of how society's going lately, there's so many people contemplating their media usage and the relationship with media. And Jessica in particular is a marketing expert and a podcasting expert. And one of the things that she's been writing about and coaching on for a long time is how podcasting, or what she calls slow media, is critical for the future of our humanity. So first, Jessica, what is slow media and why are these things so important for our future?
Heather, thanks so much, first of all, for having me on your show. I love your podcast and what you're doing. So yeah, to get to slow media, we have to understand a little bit about fast media first. So fast media is what we are used to. It is the status quo of content. It is fake and forced and really not aligned with who we are becoming as humans. And that's okay, because most of the world doesn't even question it or doesn't even know what they're consuming. A lot of the world is not conscious. They're not conscious creators. They're not conscious consumers. So it really is important to kind of take a step back and peel back the layers of what we are consuming and being more aware and awake of how that affects our bodies, our energy, our minds, our souls, in the same way that food impacts our souls and our minds. You are an Ayurveda expert, so you know all about this. When we consume certain types of foods, it affects our bodies in certain ways. And the same thing goes when we're consuming information. If it's fake or fast, it's going to rattle our nervous system. But that's why we're getting now to slow media. And it's funny because, if we can see the contrast, it makes so much sense why there is such a need for slow media. But without that contrast, you might not necessarily want to consume slow media. So with that said, when we look into what slow media is anything that makes you laugh, think, or question the status quo. It's like taking the slow lane on a beautiful highway where you can look over at the sunset and the cornfields and the animals, and just really be in pure joy because you're loving the journey. You're loving the trip, the road trip, and everything that comes along with it. You're not speeding, trying to get somewhere, mindlessly trying to, go from 0 to 60. You're slowing down and appreciating the nuances of the journey that you're on. So, when we consume slow media, we are allowed to enjoy life. We slow down so that our nervous systems have time to reset and recalibrate, which is so important today because most of what we do in this world is based on trauma-based responses. We're just conditioned to respond and react quickly and more efficiently. And there's all this hustle culture. But when we remove ourselves from that, we realize that there's a whole other world out there that we can tap into and feel aligned with. And when we're aligned, we're in flow. When we're in flow, we can communicate to our higher self. And when we communicate with our higher self, we become conscious creators, such as podcasters. We become conscious consumers, such as podcast listeners. And when people hear these types of conversations that are not available on a radio FM frequency dial, they'll realize that they can take a deep inhale and then take a deep exhale. Doesn't that feel amazing?
Oh, yeah.
So that's the goal of podcasting, is really just allowing us to feel into our bodies and to enable a higher consciousness to expand and to come through.
In slow media, there are kind of like two things that come to mind when I think about, that wonderful experience that you were talking about, that we can experience and appreciate and actually see what's there in front of us on the side of the beautiful, road that we're driving on.
Mm-hmm.
How much of what slow media is about the choice of media that we're using, for example, like a computer or a mobile device or something like that medium versus, or maybe video versus audio or whatever, that kind of medium versus the actual content and the messages. Or can the messages also be slow versus fast?
That's a great question. It just reminds me of something that Marshall McLuhan said, who was a media theorist in the 60s. He said the medium is the message. And that still holds true today. So I really think that whatever medium that we are choosing to listen on or to consume on becomes the message itself. I mean, it's kind of a philosophical answer to your question. So I'll try to really ground that in a more practical way. To your question about whether you consume it on a digital device or like a screen, I think that when we are on our screens as much as we are these days, we are consuming blue light, and any screen has blue light on it. And blue light fools the brain into thinking that it's daytime. And when that happens, the body stops releasing melatonin. And melatonin is nature's way of helping us wind down and relax. So when we're not doing this, if we're listening or we're watching a video at night, like many people do, but a lot of folks watch TV or YouTube or whatever it might be, we're not signaling to the brain that it's time to relax. We're telling the brain, hey, it's still daytime out, keep going. And that disrupts our nervous system. That disrupts our entire wiring of our body. And I actually learned all about this from interviewing one of my heroes, Dr. Jack Kruse, on my podcast, episode 59, he's one of the leaders in this topic where a lot of doctors aren't talking about this right now, but he is. And he talks all about how our bodies are electricity. Our bodies are mostly water, which means that anything that we consume goes into our bodies a lot more than we would like to think. So with that said, I think that, the blue light toxicity issue is I'm not a doctor, but I know, from my personal research and interviewing doctors like Dr. Jack Kruse, that the blue light toxic is something to be aware of. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge believer in audio podcasting, is because it allows us to get away from the screens and to go on a long hike or stay focused on the road while driving. And, you can technically multitask while you are listening to audio podcasts, but you're most likely not always looking at a screen. And I don't mean to put down anyone that does have a YouTube channel or anything like that, but it is, detrimental to our health and the future of our species if we are continuing to, suffer from a lot of the diseases that we suffer from without realizing, like, hey, it could be the technology that we are consuming and using could potentially be contributing to a lot of these diseases, and it's a catch-22 because we do need technology. At the same time, it's important to limit how we consume it through the screens and through videos and through Zoom and all that stuff. And, as I'm talking to you, Heather, right now, I'm staring out my window into the natural daylight, and I'm not staring at even though I do have my screen up to record this, I make an effort to stare out my window and to not be addicted to staring at the screen because it is so hypnotizing, and the technology companies make it hypnotizing so that we get dumbed down. And it's important to step away from that literally and figuratively and get out in nature and to breathe in fresh air and to be in healthy, empowering environments that don't necessarily dictate how we should be consuming the media that we want to consume.
Amen. And I want to say that, when I was a late adopter to getting a smartphone, everybody had one around me. I've met a few people who are later than I am, but I remember the week that I got my iPhone, and I actually remember my breathing pattern started to change. I started doing this weird little, like, choppy, fast in-breath during that week. And it's funny, but because I still used it, I observed that was happening and continue to use it. It didn't feel like something that was quite beneficial for me, to be perfectly honest. But I also, in high school, was on the basketball team and started smoking cigarettes and realized that it was the day after I smoked a cigarette, I couldn't breathe as well on the basketball court and made the stupid decision to keep smoking as a teenager. So sometimes we do stupid things when we're humans, and we do them for various reasons. But I want to dig into this idea a little bit more of the light because, and obviously, Jessica and I are not physicists. And some of the things that we talk about today might sound a little woo-woo, but there's actually a lot of science that is backing some of the things that we're talking about here, about light. So like I said, we're not physicists, and we're not going to be able to go discuss the delicate nuances of the phenomenon that we're talking about, but we can talk a little bit about light and sound. And I support this idea of, whenever possible, not staring at the screen. And in fact, Jessica, that was one of the reasons I was really excited to do the audio podcast instead of a video podcast because I felt like, well, my target audience, I assume, is probably already looking at screens too much every day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about seeing light versus hearing sound, everything hits us like you're talking about. All of the information that's coming at us, light and sound, all come in the form of waves. Now, the light waves apparently move so much faster than sound waves.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, they move at speeds that are like nearly 1 million times faster than sound waves are capable of traveling. And so that's a lot of energy coming at our bodies. And we're already getting hit with so much light. So yeah, reducing this exposure to light sounds like a great idea for so many of us. And the other thing that's interesting is for women, there's also research that shows that women have different perception of light at different times of the month. I found a study that concluded that hormonal change can, for some reason, some unknown proportion of women be linked to alterations in retinal function. The retina is that area of the eye that perceives and organizes light and visual info, and that sends, the light info to the brain via the optic nerve. So women may be even more sensitive to these things. And I don't know that there's a lot of research in that area, but the bottom line is slow marketing and where Jessica's going. This really is the future, because I think we all know that we have a lot of health issues in our society, a lot of people that are struggling with dealing with this technology. So Jessica, I know you have a deep love for health, for fitness, and this, one of the words that you use a lot is embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
And you really seem like you're on a mission to help humanity evolve in some way. What do you think we are evolving into?
I love this question. We are here to anchor the frequency of the new. We are here to merge with the collective intelligence that's existing in this ever-expanding now, beyond space and time. And we are being coded for this. Our bodies are becoming more alkaline bodies. Our bodies are becoming more crystalline energy. And, we are awakening to the reality that what worked previously in the industrial age no longer works for us in the idea age. We're in the connection economy and the idea economy right now. And everything that got us here is not going to continue to help us evolve. So one of the reasons why we're going through a lot of this tumultuous time right now is because we are kind of shifting timelines, and a lot of people who are continuing on that old timeline of fear and quote unquote logic and in wanting to just do the right thing and hustle and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying that it only gets you so far. And usually that's done with IQ, like our intelligence. Well, we're now entering our emotional bodies. And that's why I love talking about embodiment so much, is because when you actually embody, not just think about what I'm saying, these words, but actually feel it in your body and actually expand our emotions above that fear frequency to get to like pure love, pure unity, pure joy, bliss, these higher emotions. We actually are rewiring our nervous systems to exist there. And that can be the foundation for our new humanity, for our new species that we're evolving into. And one of my favorite books on this is called The Gene Keys. And it's written by one of my favorite authors and mystics and colleagues. His name is Richard Rudd. And the 55th Gene Key explains how we are like a caterpillar going into a cocoon. And we don't necessarily know what's coming out on the other end because, every thousands of years, there's new evolution on this planet, just like there's no more dinosaurs on Earth. We humans are evolving into something that we might not necessarily know at this point in time what we're evolving into. We're evolving into Homo sapien. I think it's Homo sapien sapiens. And it's really about allowing our full gene expressions to come alive. And apparently we only tap into like 5 or 10% of our unique DNA. So if that's the case, then there's this whole other window of opportunities and potential waiting for us on the other side when we become the butterfly on the other side of this cocoon. So I know this all sounds like trippy stuff to some people, but this is like science, and that's really backed into what we are now seeing. And a lot of people don't want to know about it because it might be fear inducing. But for me personally, I just find so much freedom and expansiveness in talking about this stuff because it shows that we no longer have to settle for fear and we can grow and expand into love and above frequencies through podcasting and through embodiment and through experiencing our emotions and alchemizing our emotions to access these higher frequencies.
Now, related to marketing, because you're an expert in helping people, do what you call like embodied marketing, which I love. And when I think about that, there's the aspect of marketing, which is how we market. Like, for example, I have a business. I, have to market my business and things like that. And I say have to, because of course I'm one of those people that like hates marketing and had to take all kinds of trainings to figure out how to market myself, which is funny because I, also used to work in a marketing function in a corporate job for many years ago, but it's always harder to do it for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So there's this idea of like embodied marketing when you're marketing your business. And then there's the experience of being marketed to. So when we're being a marketer, that's that energy being sort of processed and moved through and out of us. And then there's this aspect of being a consumer of marketing, which is the energy being received and then processed. So it seems as if we could be affected. And I think this is one of the things that you really talk about in your book called Humanize Your Brand. It's like this idea that we have to really get in touch with who we are in order to be effective marketers and to get into the flow. So how do you think the way that we are doing that marketing affects us mentally, physically, emotionally, and also the success of what we're doing?
I love this question. It's so funny you mentioned embodied marketing because it's exactly what I was talking about for years, before launching my podcast program. I was like, oh, I can't I do marketing for other companies, but a lot of the times people can feel that energy that the person that's actually distributing that social media post isn't really that person, or something just feels a little bit off. And I'm sure many listeners have experienced this. Like they'll see something and something's like, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that's the person that I know, or there's an energy to everything that we communicate in the world. It's like a crystal. You want to charge your crystal before you use it. You want to make sure that you're on a good aligned place before you communicate anything out into the world. So to your point about, being on the receiving end of communications, it is so important to really embody your marketing for that very reason, because as you mentioned, we are these sensitive beings. We are creatures of, we want to make sure that we can trust the people that are sending us messages. And embodiment is so powerful for this very reason, because there is this whole component of energy that you don't always see when you're content marketing, but it is always there. You can't deny it. And the universe loves authenticity. So when you line up your authentic marketing, quote unquote, and I put marketing in quotes because when you are an embodied leader, you don't necessarily have to do much, quote unquote, marketing. All you have to do is host a podcast, Heather, like you're doing right now. You just show up as the leader that you already are, embody your message, speak your truth, and communicate your vision to the world, which is a beautiful thing. You don't necessarily need to hire a $5,000 a month social media marketing agency, which is something that I do for big corporations. But at the same time, I would rather, teach people how to podcast, teach real leaders how to podcast and embody their message instead of me doing social media work for corporations who don't really know what they're doing to begin with. It all starts from like a foundation of truth and integrity. And when you have that, that's when you unleash your vibrancy out into the universe. And from there, the right people will hear you at the right time. And your marketing got a whole lot more simple and more efficient. And it's not because of anything you did. It's just who you are. It's your being. It's your essence. And when you shine that light out into the world, you resonate at a certain frequency. And when you resonate at a certain frequency, you are choosing to be on higher ground, and you can plant these seeds of awareness from this higher ground to those that are also reframing the narrative as well, and who also want to change the narrative with you. And that's the light. That's the light of the higher realms coming down and talking to, the listeners of the podcast world and the listeners of your podcast so that we can all evolve. And I really believe in the beauty and the sincerity of creating content from an embodied place, because that is really the future of our humanity. And it's also the future of business. I speak a lot about the future of humanity, but it also comes down to businesses eventually adopting the strategy as well, because it starts with the leaders. I see the world differently. I am going to create content differently, and that leads to people consuming content differently. And then that's how it all evolves and expands.
If you want to create a more receptive body, free from toxins, inflammation, and metabolic issues, would it be crazy for you to explore booking an Ayurvedic consultation with me? There's probably never been a more perfect time to do it. Every day you wait matters when it comes to your health. So if you're ready to get your body back in balance, I'll give you a 30-day plan to get you started. Go to heathergrish.com to book a consultation. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com.
So basically, I can put myself on this podcast and risk being seen as a total dummy or a total weirdo. And somehow it works out for me.
I would not call you a dummy or a weirdo, but everyone has their frequency, like if you want to put a weirdo frequency out there, there's other weirdos that will love what you're saying and eat up every bite.
Totally. So Jessica, I did a digital detox last weekend.
Right. Yeah, you told me. That's crazy. Mm-hmm.
What I did was 24 hours with no screens, no music, and no movies.
Wow.
Yeah, and even driving in the car with my son, I shut the radio off. So over that time, actually, I'm sorry, it was 48 hours, not 24, 48 hours. I noticed there were probably about 10 moments in that time where I went to grab my phone or grab my computer. And I always talk about with people that I feel like I have a little hand in my mind that wants to grab things. One of the listeners, I'd love it if you have artistic talent, if you could draw that for me and email it to me, that would be amazing. Mm-hmm. But this idea that we all have this little hands in our minds that want to grab things. So a lot of what we're talking about today, and when you deny yourself something that you're used to, which, you could call it a fast of some sort, right? A detox of some sort. So you kind of have a lot of observations about it. When you reintroduce it, you really get to see, how it affects you upon that reintroduction. And you also get to see what you're like without it. And a lot of what you're talking about, and I think a lot of the problems that we're all facing is this just addiction to doing. And, even in your book, you talk about not forcing things. And one of the quotes I love that you have in your book is, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
And this was in the chapter where you discuss being in marketing limbo and holding yourself back from getting out there with your work. So when a person gets in marketing limbo, is there a toggling that's happening in some way where they're stuck? What are some of the ways that you recommend that they do that?
Yeah, I love this because you're so right. I mean, when it comes to technology and having that second brain, in our hands all the time, it really shows how much of a Google brain we have. It's like we're being rewired to always have Google in our back pocket, literally and figuratively. And it's not always a good thing. And I just call on us, me included. I mean, I'm not saying I'm immune from this either, but just to be more mindful of that as you did with your 48-hour digital detox, because, it's a slow build, but these technologies are restructuring our brains. And I'm sure many people have already seen that documentary that's out right now. I think it's The Social Network.
The Social Dilemma, yeah.
The Social Dilemma, yeah, where it really shows really what technology is doing and the addiction it is causing our brains. So, I really stress and iterate and underline the importance of getting out in nature and turning your phone on airplane mode and going surfing and being in, nature and hikes among the redwoods or wherever you live where there's beautiful trees that you can breathe the oxygen. Henry David Thoreau said we should come home from adventures and discoveries every day with new experience and character. And, when we pick up a new hobby, we can really become these, vessels of light and allow ourselves to get away from the technology, to get away from like the mundane, the status quo. I'm saying that a lot of people's work may be exciting and thrilling and exhilarating, everything that they're doing online. But at the same time, if we're only on our computers every single second of the day, we are going to turn into these, we're not going to be good humans is the bottom line. So, I really advocate doing yoga, surfing, taking steps outside of your house and just being embodied and loving those quiet moments of solitude, even though they can be scary for a lot of people because we're used to the addiction of our phones, making sure that we're more mindful of why we're picking up our phones. If we're just picking up our phones to aimlessly scroll social media, just notice the effect that has on our brains long term. And, we teach what we need to learn. And I think that I'm not immune to this. As I mentioned, it's one of those things where it's like we're all part of the solution to get better. And if we're all demanding instant responses from each other all day long, then we're just going to become frazzled and nervous wrecks. So I like to just say, take a step away, 48-hour social media break, get in the water, be in nature, have fun, laugh with a friend, call a friend, whatever you need to do to just get away from the monotony of a digital life is really important, which you wouldn't think you'd hear from a marketer, but I'm advocating. I'm a huge advocator of it.
So Jessica, how much do you think the marketing that we are the recipients of, because I know we're talking about, the marketing that we do and the marketing that we are the recipients of, how much do you think that shapes our beliefs?
Ooh, yeah, it totally. Oh, wow. This is a whole other topic I love talking about. It totally shapes our beliefs. And I think that if we're not mindful of how our beliefs are getting shaped, that's another huge red flag as well. It's another one of those status quo default moments that we're not even aware of how technology is shaping our belief systems and reframing the narrative of who we think we are. And we saw that with the 2016 elections with, Cambridge Analytica, with Facebook and, to those, I'm sure many people already know what happened back then, but a lot of what we're consuming online is psychology and it's based off emotions and likes, and technology fuels that. So, when we found out that this company, Cambridge Analytica, who was based in Boston, was using kind of the emotions of Facebook to divert our human psychology and behaviors, that is a huge red flag. And I think most people should be waking up to the fact that this is happening so that they can just do whatever we need to do to make sure that our beliefs and our free will isn't taken away from us. I think that we have the power to set our own free will in motion, and it shouldn't be coming from technology or social media.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like sharing emotions is bad. And in fact, it's really good for us to do that and to allow emotions to pass. But it's this thing where you have an entity creating a false paradigm or a false reality that there's some emotional exchange taking place that is completely contrived.
Totally. Absolutely. It is contrived. And I think that a lot of people right now that aren't aware of their emotions, a lot of, people that are living this life, the former life, and, it's this life of fear and judgment and opinion. They think that they're doing the right thing. And they're saying like, oh, you should do this. And it's really this black versus white mentality when we can exist from above that. There is a path to kind of transcending the bullshit and going above black, white, responses, because the system is rigged. And when you go above that, you can actually exist in emotions. And I know, emotions are a good thing. And I think that a lot of our society is trained to think that emotions are bad. But when we actually embody the emotions that we feel and we transmute them into the highest good for all, it becomes a superpower. A lot of people are going through anger and rage right now. If you don't numb that, if you actually feel that rage, it can quickly turn into passion. Anything like sadness can quickly turn into ecstatic joy. You can transmute any negative emotion quicker into a higher emotion if you actually feel it and you don't numb it and you don't pretend it's not there. And this is something that, you learn through therapy, you learn through just learning that the old ways don't work anymore. And the more you try to hide and run from your emotions, the more that they take hold of you and they steer you. And you think that you are in control of your life, but you're really trying to judge your emotions from your mind and your intellect, when the future of our species, is based on emotions. It's based on feeling that and then moving through the world in that way. We need to see our human emotions like a grain of sand or a wave in the ocean, like we are one unbroken chain of consciousness streaming through the screens of reality, transcending duality. And that's really the new essence of our presence. So when we tap into that, we can rise up to the top.
Jessica, before you wrote your book, had you heard about Ayurveda? Because I know that one of the chapters in your book, you actually give a really great writing exercise on how to get in touch with your core values as a marketer.
Mm-hmm.
And your writing exercise actually uses the metaphor of the 5 elements from Ayurveda to do that. Had you heard of Ayurveda before you wrote your book?
I remember going to my first Ayurvedic training in DC way back in the day. I think I was like 2010 or 11. And there was really not many people in this workshop, to be honest, but I was so into it and I really loved it. And I just continue to kind of self-study since then on my own. And I really have found so much value in the principles of Ayurveda. And I love how knowledgeable you are in Ayurveda. And I'm always learning new things from you and through the methodologies and principles of it. And just like our bodies are always changing, you can always learn new things and learn about new spices and foods and stuff in Ayurveda and allow that to integrate into our well-being.
So because you're familiar, I know one of the most common things people learn about Ayurveda in our culture is about the doshas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And I know we talk a lot offline because we're buds, and we talk a lot about Vata. And, Vata is that energy of movement and change, and we all need that energy, and we all need sort of like the right amount of it for our bodies to be able to handle, or the body will then sort of experience things that are maybe degenerative in nature, I guess I would say, is the way to summarize it. And one of the things that comes with Vata, it's not like all degeneration is bad. I think little bits of it, especially for certain people, are actually quite good. That's what fasting does for you. Fasting helps, break your body down a little bit so that you can have some more beneficial health. And, if you do it too much, it leads to a bunch of things that are not great for your body. But part of this process has to do with sensitivity and our experience of the world. And it does seem, and I think it has to do with this Vata dosha, that people really have varying levels of sensitivity in our society, in the world. And, that's part of what you're talking about with, okay, if we all just sit here on the computers and put our heads down and do the work and not pay attention and get in this sort of like hamster wheel of just, the status quo, that if we never, step outside of that and see that there's a whole world outside of that little routine that we've been stuck in for a really long time, that can come with its own kind of issue. And on the other end of that is that we can have levels of sensitivity that are like so intense that they could be either painful or really pleasurable, because when you get more receptive, it could go either way, right? You receive more, and you receive more of the pain or more of the pleasure. So some of what we've been talking about with the sensitivity to light and things like that, it's interesting how those of us who are more highly sensitive, and I am at times, I'm not as sensitive as you are, I would say.
Not many people are. I win that award.
It's like we're really viewed as crazy when we have this additional level of sensitivity that others don't have. And that can change though later, whereas that person who was once perceived as sensitive is sometimes later perceived as the visionary. Can you think of some examples of people that's happened to?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The first person that comes to mind is, of course, Steve Jobs. He was just so visionary, and he really tapped into this new realm of design. And, he allowed his story to shape the world, which is super important. And I think that, as we become, I think all of us have the ability to be empaths and to be sensitive. And I think it is the rewiring of our systems. And then once we let go of that, we can actually feel more deeply. And it's scary for a lot of people because a lot of people don't want to feel. Feelings are scary for a lot of people. So I'm not downplaying, the fear around that for sure. But as a sensitive person, I think we can be privy to a lot more of the information. And I like to call them downloads because it's not necessarily like information that I'm reading. It's more of like this feeling, embodied feeling that I'm very perceptive with, that I can feel that is coming, over this earth. And, a lot of that has to do with, if you do study things like the Schumann resonance, it's the heartbeat of the earth. And when you realize that, like, no, you're not crazy, like you're not more sensitive, that actually the earth is speeding up. The heartbeat of earth is getting faster. And this is all science talk and stuff, but I like to kind of incorporate some academics and intellect into what I'm feeling because I do often feel super crazy at times.
So in your book, Humanize Your Brand, How to Create Content That Connects with Your Customers, you talk about discovering your brand's origin story and using the 5 elements of Ayurveda. Can you tell the audience a little bit about how they might do that?
Sure. So yeah, I think it's really important to stress that content creates the message, but context is what sells your message. And when you tap into the context of your message through Ayurveda, through the different elements in nature, that's when you can really have a unique origin story. And that's how you can, communicate your unique frequency. So your core values aren't necessarily just about you. There's always something larger at play. And to determine your origin story, you can look to nature. You can look to the elements to kind of use symbolism and build out that story. So fire, for example, is your product. Whether you're an author or an entrepreneur, every business owner has a product. So consider fire as your product and water as your customer. When we think of our customers as water, they're fluid. We want to develop our business models as fluid business models to be able to help our customers who are water. And then we look to earth, and earth is our roots and where is, the customer's roots and where they come from. So that's super important to know kind of where your customers are coming from, because that allows us to tell a story that's aligned with their mission. And air is your brand and the perception of your brand. So that's a lot of the Vata energy. It's a lot of, and a lot of the times it's where a lot of the fun can come in, because it's kind of the swirling energy. You can always create something new from scratch. You can always communicate something new from a higher level rather than getting lost in the weeds. And you notice how I'm talking so passionately about air and brand and perception, because I'm a lot of Vata energy. And ether is your culture. And really, when it comes to culture, it's not about how the world shapes you, but rather how you shape your story. So your relationship to change is one of the most important relationships that you can have. And it all starts with nature. When you look to nature and you see how all of the different elements are constantly changing, you can have more solid concepts and structure around your brand narrative and your origin story.
And so classic Vata, because it's Vata that's behind all movement, all change, all evolution.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that's where the depth of story is. That's where all the, I keep saying fun, but I find it really fun. I like change, and I like being able to kind of create culture from scratch. Yeah, I think a lot of the new wisdom of today's society is coming from ancient mystics. And when we now are aligning kind of the new studies in science with what we previously knew in ancient mystics, that's like true superpowers right there. That's really true. That allows us to really make sense of the world, because, all the, the poems and the musings of the mystics are actually starting to make sense. If you can embody that, if you can really feel what they were saying, it makes a lot of sense.
I love that the person that came to mind for you was Steve Jobs, because we're all using technology, not all of us, but so many of us are using, I guess, sort of the end result of him sort of putting his energy, his visionary energy into the world. And we're all absolutely addicted to what he put out in the world. So if, people are doing that and putting themselves out in the world, visionaries that have other visions, that have also now the kinds of visions that we need for our future on the planet, that unless you step forward with the courage to be able to do that and to do this marketing work that Jessica's been talking about, that you're not going to get your message out there. You're not going to help humanity. So Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your message and your experiences with us. And for people to get in touch with you to either learn about your Jessica Ann Media company or your podcast, how do you recommend they do that?
Sure. Yeah. Listeners can go to artofhumanity.io/episodes to take a look at all of the interviews that I've done on my podcast. You can also find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Being is Human. That's BEINGISHUMAN.
Awesome, Jessica. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.